workshop with John Goulter. I hope I got that right. Yes. Some basic housekeeping rules. Please do not consume food and sweetened drinks in here. Okay, if you need water, there's water at the back if you need. Also, if at any point in time, if you have any questions, you can actually post them on the website Slido. I maintain a close watch on it, and sometimes I sound John out on any questions you may have during the presentation. So feel free to go to slido.com and enter 0806JG. All right. So let me introduce John a little bit. We were having a very cool conversation earlier. So John works as a teacher at St. Patrick's College, Townsville. He currently teaches music, English and Japanese through high school. He graduated from Australian Catholic University with a Bachelor in Teaching and Bachelor of Arts, majoring in music, minor in languages. Interestingly, he puts a marriage of traveling and music, his two loves, and that's why you see he goes to Japan, Tuva, India to study practical ethnomusicology. And he really believes also in using the Kodai approach to help students of all backgrounds to engage in music education. So without further ado, ladies and gents, this is John.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to my presentation today. As he said, my name is John Goulter. I'm a secondary music teacher from Townsville, Queensland in Australia. Before I begin my presentation today, I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous people who have been so essential to this research project. Their names are on the screen. So, as said, I have a history and passion for practical ethnomusicology. I've studied music in Tuva, India, Japan, and now in my home country, Indigenous groups. I'll be talking about my experience working with those groups and how and why I have tried to incorporate Indigenous music and culture into the music program at St. Patrick's. St. Patrick's is an all-girls independent Catholic school which caters for day and boarding students ranging from ages 11 to 18. For those of you who don't know, Australian Indigenous people are classified into two main groups: Aboriginal Australians who come from the mainland and some coastal regions, and Torres Strait Islanders who come from the island cluster to the north of Australia between Australia and Papua New Guinea. They've been in the area for over 50,000 years and make up 40% of my student population at St. Pat's. This research project came up in a linear fashion. It firstly came up because I saw the low levels of engagement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in the classroom music program, and their general apathy towards most types of music making in the school environment. This low level of engagement logically leads to an underachievement for the majority of those students in the music subject, and less of those students choosing to participate in music in the senior years. On the flip side of this, I saw the same students actively participating in select musical and cultural events at the school. These events commonly involve celebrating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. At these events, I saw those students sing passionately and dance dances that help tell their own stories and histories. Most incredibly, I saw elder students leading younger Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students to participate and freely express their culture at those events. This led me to reflect deeply upon the Kodai teaching pedagogy. An essential part of that is teaching students from their mother tongue using authentic folk song. Kodai, in one of his writings, wrote, "Folk traditions, starting with children's songs, are the best foundation of a culture's subconscious. For Australian Indigenous people, connection to community, land, and culture is essential to their identity. Therefore, I thought a way to engage the students in class would be to use songs from their cultural background. This would not only allow those students to freely express their culture in a place they spend the majority of the year away from their family and their living culture on their land, it would also educate non-Indigenous students about huge culture that we have at school." There's also some of my students learn English as their third or fourth language, so including songs in their languages might just help them engage in the music program. Next, not knowing much about other schools' use of Indigenous knowledge, I began to research on how other schools have done this and if they have been successful. I'll speak more about this in my methods a little bit later. Now to why I think this project is important, specifically in my context, and I think for me, any type of multicultural music education. Indigenous parents have stated that when they send their children away to boarding school, they feel like they believe that their students are at risk of losing some of their cultural knowledge, and that might result in losing some of their cultural identity. These parents are wanting us as teachers to help facilitate those students to keep their culture alive and to freely express it. Different research from secondary and tertiary educational institutions have shown the use of cultural materials in class may aid students to develop a self and cultural identity, which has been shown to increase in resilience, self-esteem, school attendance, engagement, and achievement levels. Lastly, and most importantly for Australia, between 1910 and 1970, many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children were removed from their homes due to government policy. This led to a tragic loss of family, culture, and language. I have students who have personally been affected by this. My student's mother was taken from her family. That student's mother never learned her language or any of her cultural practices, and therefore can't pass that on to my student. When we spoke about this, my student's very sad at this. So, research from Finland, Macedonia, and Australia have shown that using music, especially songs in Indigenous language, may help in language and cultural revitalisation, which in turn may help in reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups. So, the aim and focus of the service learning project is to help engage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in the classroom music program through the use of culturally relevant curriculum. I have used a combination of participatory action research and critical service learning to help guide my interactions with these community groups. This is a preliminary report which will outline what has been done so far and reflect on this. Methods. Upon reading of strategies employed by different educational institutions when working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups, I saw that participatory action research and critical service learning had been used with successful outcomes for both groups. The participatory action research cycle creates change through action and consists of a look, think, act cycle. Critical service learning adds to this cycle by ensuring that communities that you are working with help guide the research and that their community identified needs are met. In my context, the community identified need was the desire for students to be able to freely express their own culture while learning more about the land and the traditional owners of that land where they attend school. In this case, the Wulgarikaba and Bindal people in Townsville. I will now outline what I did during the look, think, act parts of this cycle. First up was look. I saw the majority of Indigenous students lacking in their engagement in the music education program, but those same students showed the ability to independently organise themselves to perform their own cultural materials. This led to reading and research on culturally relevant curriculum. Culturally relevant curriculum involves using aspects of student-specific culture to help them engage in classroom learning. This started with Ladson and Billings back in 1990 with the initial literature, and that literature has continued to grow into the 21st century, with teachers using language, art, music to help engage students in their classrooms. Some results of culturally relevant curriculum in classrooms have shown that students who can culturally relate to the content learn more and engage with that more from that content. Indigenous educational researchers from Australia encourage teachers to use Indigenous culture in the classroom to show Indigenous students in a positive light. Chris Sauer puts this as, it's good to do well in the classroom and be Indigenous at the same time. Or in other words, being Indigenous can be linked to performing well in the classroom. This may help students develop their own identity and through connection to culture, which may lead to an increase in resilience and achievement levels. Next, to further my knowledge regarding Indigenous culture, I looked at the different community groups in Townsville and started to attempt to build positive relationships with them. I have currently contacted the local Indigenous ministry, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander dance groups, well-known elders who lead music and culture in the community, and cultural leaders at different churches. At each of these initial meetings, they've expressed a desire to work together, but they have made it explicit that I, as a non-Indigenous person, must work with them a lot to help build build the trust before we can share any sort of cultural materials. To help build that trust, I engaged in musical and non-musical activities. Musical activities included attending church services where singing was in Indigenous languages, leading rehearsals to different community groups, and attending cultural dances and performances to help educate myself about the culture I'm trying to introduce at the school. The non-musical activities included attending culturally significant functions, such as the Coming of Light event, celebrated by the Torres Strait Islander people, attending lunches with elders, and helping to clean up churches in preparation for NAIDOC Mass. NAIDOC is National Aboriginal Islanders Day and Observance Committee Week. This week celebrates history, culture, and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. These musical and non-musical activities have been essential to start building trust between myself and those groups, which, as they said, is essential when we're talking about any sharing of culture. Now we move on to the think part of the look, think, act cycle. Initially, I started to take the songs from Indigenous songs from my own personal collections and song file and arrange them pedagogically to suit the scope and sequence at St. Patrick's College. Even though normally I will not deconstruct Indigenous songs into solfa or time names, I still use those songs to practice certain elements unconsciously to give them some representation. The main reason I do not deconstruct those songs is because they are not of my culture, and I have not discussed this type of this aspect of teaching the songs with the community group sharing it. But I know, as Australian Kodo practitioners, we do deconstruct songs not from our culture, from Africa, Europe, from all over the world. I've still not come to a conclusive decision, if given permission by the elders, to deconstruct the songs as a teaching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that at the end of the discussion. Next, I use the improved relationship to invite the elders and community groups into the school to come and watch and participate at significant school events. School events included award nights and major assemblies celebrating student achievement. Indigenous events at the school included NAIDOC Week, National Sorry Day, and various Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander celebration and remembrance days. Community groups always seem happy to be included in these events, or to always ask to be included in any future events. Finally, I reflected upon the different opportunities I had meeting and working with those groups. The basic idea of respect for elders and musical collaboration skills I knew and I could use already. There are some cultural differences between myself and the groups that were present in this project. The first one was sorry business. Sorry business is the standard mourning and funeral process of different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. When someone dies, most activities in the community are put on hold for up to some months, up to many years. This is different for every different group. They might do it differently depending on the person. This has been one thing that has been present in the project. I have to be aware of that. The next cultural difference was how decisions for the community had to be made by a council of elders. Normally when meeting with these groups, I'd meet with a young representative. That representative would talk to me, would discuss what I wanted to do. He would then talk to a single elder, who would then go to a council of elders to make the decision. Sometimes just getting a yes or no to whether we could work together took up to 2 months. For me, that seems long, but I have to also respect it in the way that they make decisions and the way that their timeline works. That's just part of this project and working with different cultures. So, what did I do with all of the information and songs that the elders have shared with me so far? These following ideas come from the Australian Social Work Guideline for teaching Indigenous students and incorporating their knowledge and culture into the curriculum. The first thing I could do was I teach. At this point in time, there's no Indigenous member of staff at St. Patrick's College. This means non-Indigenous teachers are spending all of the time teaching Indigenous and non-Indigenous students music. As I said before, I started using songs from my own song file to put into the program. I endeavoured to have one song per term for the 7 and 8 mandatory schooling program at St. Patrick's. This is the first part of the project. Torres Strait Islander songs, I could find one for each term. Aboriginal folk songs I found more difficult to find one for each term. When I couldn't find Aboriginal folk songs, I used songs from famous Aboriginal musicians such as Goulter, Kev Carmody, Jessica Malboy and Yothu Yindi. For each song I teach, I ensure that I tell them the musical reason we're learning the song, any histories or stories behind that song, and sorry, I've just gone out. And why we should learn Indigenous repertoire in our context. Some non-Indigenous students put their hands up and go, this doesn't represent my background, why should I learn it in a different language? I reply to them, Indigenous cultures have been in this land much longer than Western culture. They were here for many years before we came. We are now living together. It's important that we learn bits from each culture so we can learn to live together peacefully. They teach. As well as working with community groups to upskill myself and learn songs, I invited those community groups to come into the school to teach the students their songs directly. This resulted in a huge attendance from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. I think mainly because the students wanted to spend time with people in community groups who look like them and represent their Indigenous Australia. The students who participated in these meetings behaved perfectly and were joyous to work with the groups. They would always ask them to come back soon. The last one is students teach. I wanted to start to facilitate students who have their own cultural knowledge, especially senior students, to come into the school, to work in the school and teach the other students. This comes in two parts. First, I encourage senior students to come into the music classroom during their timetable classes and teach a song or a dance to the Year 7 and 8 girls. I think this is more realistic than waiting for an Indigenous member of staff to come and be hired and also teach music. And it's also more consistent than asking community groups to give up their time, makes time in their schedule to fit into our schedule, which is the school timetable quite rigid. It also empowers those older students with leadership skills and serves as a good role model for the younger students who I hope one day will do the same. The second part of this is co-teaching with students. This is where students come up with the teacher on assembly and teach songs to the whole school. We have a unique timetable slot. It's called Whole School Choir. It's where we get to teach sing some popular songs as a whole school at the same time. Being a music teacher, we can prepare upcoming hymns or teach important songs for assemblies to the whole school at once. It's quite nice. I started to use this space to have Indigenous songs and myself or other music teachers to teach Indigenous songs to the whole school at the same time. Co-teaching means that the Indigenous students would normally stand next to me. I'd have a microphone, they'd sing the song to me, and then I would echo the song to the school. This allows them to give me an accurate pronunciation, melodic inflections, all of that stuff. And it also showed the school that it wasn't me teaching them, it was a student teaching me, and I was just sharing that with the school. I'd like to go over some early results and student reactions to this project. The first one is increased student engagement in class when cultural songs were taught. So far I have used different songs from Torres Strait Islander Creole, a mixture of English and Island language, and songs in non-Aboriginal English. Some of these songs represent our students' background and some of them do not. Overall, students seem enthusiastic when their songs were included in the class. Songs with a lively tempo, they were upbeat, normally were met with more enthusiasm. It is to be noted that Aboriginal students were not always enthusiastic when Torres Strait Islander songs were taught, and vice versa. I had a Torres Strait Islander student ask me last week, "So why am I learning this song? I'm not Aboriginal." I said the same thing that I said to the non-Indigenous students. We're all sharing this together. It's good for us to learn bits of each culture so we learn more. It's also interesting that she had that reaction because when a boys group came into the Torres Strait Islander only boys group came into the school to do some cultural dances, both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander girls were really enthusiastic to go watch. That might just be because there were young boys dancing for them, but I don't think it's that. I think it's a shared sense of culture. I'll tell you now why I think that. After this dances, the girls were extremely enthusiastic to get their own dance groups together. One interesting thing about that is that they didn't want anything to do with the boys. They wanted to be taught by female elders. In Indigenous Australia, normally females teach females, males teach males. And they didn't want anything to do with the boys. One, because they wanted to be taught by female elders. Secondly, they just think the boys were too rough, too loud, and too annoying. I think that's what they said. Students have started to share some of their own music with the teachers. Having casual conversations with students regarding songs and their culture has led to students sharing these songs and asking if we can use them in the school community. This has led to a co-teaching strategy of us working out a song together, the students singing it to me on assembly and us sharing it with the school. That's been an early goal of this project, is to incorporate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture more visibly to the whole school. One of the most important ones has been visibly working with elders and the students' reaction to that. Often in order to rehearse, elders would come into the school, being a boarding school, the boarders who are mainly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander would see this. They would ask questions, why are you meeting with them? They were very protective of that, why are you meeting with them? I'd explain the project to them, and one of the most common things is, why do you care so much about our culture? It's not yours. And I said the same thing again, that I said to the non-Indigenous student and the Torres Strait Islander student. It's good for us to learn to live together and share some culture. Students are generally happy with this answer. Overall, by visibly working with the elders, I think this has changed some of the students' views on me as a teacher and towards the music subject in general. I'll explain that in the summary. Just some quick points. Students seem more engaged in the classroom music program during when I'm teaching, in this lesson segment when I'm teaching and we're using their songs, and even after it. The engagement effect seems to be overarching once their songs have been utilised and performed appropriately. Community groups seem more open to coming into working with me and other teachers in the school and teaching the songs to their students through the community work I've done. Students seem more interested in performing music outside of the classroom, i.e. the dance groups, or whole groups of Indigenous students coming up and asking if they can make their own little band, which last year was not happening at all. So for me, that's a win. Lastly, I think the positive reaction and change in attitudes towards teachers and the music subject in our school. I'd like to finish up now with some conclusions and implications for practice. Always include the relevant community groups in your decisions. Seek out who they are in your community. They will be different for every place. Tell them what you want to do and hear their thoughts on it. These are the people who facilitate this knowledge, and you must work with them. In my situation, I've been working with tech groups in Townsville. My next step is to work with the groups where my students come from. For me, that's more than a 4-hour drive sometimes, or a chartered flight to the middle of the Torres Strait. So, always be patient when working with elders and community groups. As said before, there are some significant cultural differences, mainly with sorry business and the different way that they communicate and make decisions in their own groups. Be aware if they are present, and be understanding. They will get back to you, and they do. If they have said they want to work with you, they were just they're just doing things in their own way. Always ask permission before using cultural materials. There may be specific songs only to be sung at certain occasions, or to be sung by or taught to certain people only at certain times in their lives. Furthermore, singing songs from different Indigenous cultures may elicit different emotions coming out from students. It is essential to be sensitive and aware of your student reactions to different songs presented in class. Understand you might not be able to teach some of the songs. This is particularly relevant for me. Before I said females teach females, males teach males. I'm a male teacher, teaching all girls at an all-girls school, working primarily with female community groups. I'm therefore limited to how much I can directly teach from what I learn. But it doesn't hinder me in facilitating female community groups coming to the school and working. My female music teachers going out to the community and working, or me and the other male music teacher going out to the community and work with the male groups so we can learn more about the culture we want to introduce. The last one. Always explain where you're receiving the cultural materials from and why you're using them in the classroom. You can get songs from songbooks or CDs and stuff, and there's lots of that in Australia. But going out into the community, working with the people where these songs come from, their living culture, has been not only great personal learning for me, but a great teaching tool when students ask, where did you get this from? Who taught you this? Who gave you permission to teach us this? Some students do ask that. I then have my own history and story, and I can say that. Thank you very much for attending my presentation today. I hope it's been some use in your practice. If you have any questions, ask me now, or if you'd like any research, please email me at my email on the board. Thank you.
There is a question in the Slido. Someone asked, did you transcribe the songs or movements for your curriculum?
Yes, so some songs that students have shared with us, we've notated so we can teach it. So other teachers, it's just a bit faster for Western musicians. So yes, we do transcribe songs. Yes.
Were you working alone in your school, or did you get cooperation with other departments?
No, alone. I've got some music teachers who came on this year who I tell them what I'm up to, and
Do you envision that this would be more effective with your history department involved?
oh yeah, very much so. I'm running a presentation when I get back from the school, so hopefully they get a look at that. Any other questions?
Wow, okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, yes.
This is a really fascinating project. Thank you so much for your efforts.
Okay, that's it.
Did you encounter any resistance about
Yes.
the process?
Yes.
Could you share
The
So the question is, did John encounter any resistance in the process of doing this project?
yeah. So
it's for the people.
two types of resistance. The first one is me being male and wanting to work with in the all-girls school and get the female groups in. And like I said, that it limits what I can do. It doesn't limit how I can help the rest of my school and my music team going out and learning. The second resistance was I called a dance group during there was sorry business going on, and they didn't want to talk to anyone. And I didn't know that, and I had to wait a while, and I ended up speaking to someone else who introduced me personally, and then that situation was resolved. So small bits of resistance. No one said no completely yet. If they do, some might. I don't know their history with interaction with Indigenous people. Hello.
Is there any research or work done in
Sorry.
compiling or sort of making public these songs, or it refers to particular?
There's some small songbooks, but none that I know of it open to general public. It's hard because in Australia there traditionally was over more than 500 different groups and languages, so it depends on where you are, and the cultures are from one group to one group are completely different. You can't just lump them together. If someone was to do that, you'd have to ask permission from whoever you're dealing with, and make sure that they give you permission. Yeah.
And strict rules as well, singing the song in country versus singing it out of country. So
Yeah.
we have to also ask questions about that and seek permission. So publicity of the materials is very difficult.
Yeah.
So that's why it's such a fantastic project.
Yeah.
Hello.
And I'd imagine, because it's difficult to publish material like that, but one thing I could imagine being really useful for Australian music teachers is if you publish your methodology.
Yes.
Sort of this is how you can approach your
Yeah.
local community. These are the sort of things that you should ask them, because then that empowers teachers to go along the same path. Because I think for a lot of us, we're maybe not as brave as you are in going out and doing that. And maybe if you publish something like that, then the schools might also be willing to support teachers, release them
Yeah.
from a bit of teaching time so that they can go
And
and
they're good people to talk to as well.
Yeah.
That's also the hardest part.
That's it.
Places.
And that's one of the goals of this, is once I move on now to get some real data about how the students are finding it, publish what I've done, and say this worked for me in this context, try and see what works for you.
yeah, I think that would be incredibly useful, because a lot of Australian music teachers do feel like they don't know quite how to go about it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
I know, John, you said that you're not yet analysing them in terms of concept and
Yeah.
all that classic photo stuff. Do you get a sense though, like, if you transcribe them, I guess, do you get a sense that they are useful in that
Yes.
way? Yeah, so there are ones that you.
Yeah. So, and I have used some songs specifically that we've been given to, the school's been given,
Yeah.
and they said, yeah, you can do what you want. We've explained that to them, but the majority I haven't. And we use that one for T-Ticker and Ticker T, and it's a great practice. It's all over the place.
But I guess also if you said that the carry across of their openness travels to different music as well. So
Yeah.
you wouldn't have to construct the whole curriculum just out of the songs from there. Yeah.
Even using one song has really, the girls light up. And it's just great to see, and that really engage, and that lasts for most of the lesson, if not the whole lesson, when you do that, so it's really nice. Hello.
Okay. So do you incorporate the 8 ways of learning and the 8 ways of knowing then into the delivery of your curriculum in conjunction with CODA?
Not, yes.
Okay.
But I know I have that, I've got that in the, that social work guideline.
Yeah.
And so this is still just the preliminary report, we've only started from the start of this year,
Okay.
and we're slowly getting there,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Cool. I'd like to see it when it was done.
Yeah.
Yeah, the delivery with the Indigenous perspective of that curriculum that actually is delivered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. I'm sorry, because I was fascinated with this. What's this 8 ways of learning and
You can go.
No. What's your presentation, mate?
I know it's there. I haven't really divulged into it yet, so that's why I'm saying maybe. I know there's different ways of Indigenous knowing and learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the 8 ways of knowing is actually an Indigenous perspective of delivering curriculum that uses the 8 ways of delivering from our First Nations people, and it was devised by a First Nations doctor of education, and his name escapes me, which is very awful.
Google.
And it's been really good, but there are different ways, like Gardner's theory of
multiple
education.
intelligences?
Yeah,
Okay.
and how you can deliver all of your curriculum, including Codine, from an Indigenous
Perspective.
which
Uh-huh.
has a way of connecting to community, connecting to culture, connecting to songlines and landlines, and connecting to all different sorts of ways. So that is a pedagogical curriculum that you can take and transplant anywhere within Australia using white Western knowledge as well as non-Aboriginal First Nation, non-Aboriginal and First Nation.
Is that a national curriculum thing?
It is, and ACARA,
Yeah.
for those Australians here, is utilising it to bring in some of the First Nations perspectives within the Australian.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you for enlightening us, because that was great. I think this is exactly what the IKS is for, to share and to hopefully gain some enlightenment from it as well. We have John to thank today for a wonderful and very interesting project, and for having the courage to do this.